Well, welcome everyone. Unfortunately, this presentation is going to be in English. It's okay with me, and I hope it's okay with you, because there are many English-speaking people here. Men selvfølgelig så skulle jeg gjerne snakke dansk, fordi jeg er så veldig glad i Danmark, og i Norge så er det noe som heter at det er godt å være norsk i Danmark. Og det må jeg bare underskrive på. Vi er veldig glad i våre nære danske naboer. Vi var jo en gang en dansk koloni, og av en eller annen idiotisk grunn så klarte dere å gi oss bort til Sverige. Og det tror jeg dere kan angre på nå. Men vi klarte å rive oss løs til slutt, og har for så vidt klart oss bra alene. Ja, det var en god idé at du minte meg på det, for jeg har også glemt å slå av min egen mobiltelefon her. Okay. But anyway, this is going to be in English. And today we are, and I'm very happy to see you all here. I'm amazed that so many of you have found your way here on this Saturday morning. And I hope that this whole conference will give you what you are coming for and give you insight in this very special phenomenon. We are going to talk today about one of the most strange things that are happening on this planet in our time. And also probably one of the best kept secrets that are around on this time. So to me, the UFO phenomenon has always engaged me quite a lot. Ever since I was a kid, this topic, of course, was of great interest. I wondered, where did I actually come from, and what was the reason with being here? What happened when I died, etc., etc. I started asking myself those questions when I was like 12 years old. And then I found in my bookshelf at home, my father had bought this book in the early 50s. And when I was like 10, 12 years old, just in the late 50s, I found this book in the bookshelf and read it. And well, that's one of the things that really changed my life, even though I was a kid. But I was absolutely flabbergasted, as you say in English. And I even did we had at school we had these historical reports that we were going to write for our exams, and I wrote about flying saucers. Nobody else did. And I was mobbed, of course. Everybody thought I was a big fool. And ever since, when I've talked about this topic to my colleagues, to my friends, and even to members of my family, they say, Terje, please, why can't you land on Earth? You know. So it's been kind of a struggle to stand up for this topic. But in my early 20s, I discovered this book, Livet etter livet, which, well, it's by Raymond Moody, called Life After Life. I guess some of you probably have read it. And that was also something that changed my life. It was a book about near-death experiences and Dr. Raymond Moody's studies into this topic, which kind of exposed that there is a great possibility that life does not end when the physical corpse dies, it continues. And so these two things really changed my beliefs, my worldview. And when I stepped into this field of exploring this as a 20-year-old, I felt just like jumping off a cliff. Actually, my son now, who's in the 30s, 10 years ago, he went with a friend to see what it was like to jump off a cliff. And he shot a video that I want to show you.
Faen er han da? Der er han!
Well, fortunately, as you probably saw, his friend was able to pull or to release the parachute right in time. I was very happy that my son didn't try to do that after him. But this is sometimes how I feel when I step into this field, that it's just like jumping off a cliff. You jump into something that you don't know how really to control it, but hopefully you have the ability to release a parachute before you hit very hard the ground or whatever it is down there. So it is stepping into this area is really, or to stepping into the unknown like this is quite challenging, and it challenges both all your belief systems, and it challenges your whole environment and everything. I guess all of you know that. That's probably the reason why you're here. But so to me, life has been kind of an everlasting ride of trying to explore the nature of reality. And I started quite early working with films, which was one of my main interests. I joined the Norwegian Broadcasting Corporation in the mid-70s after my studies. And I was there for about 10 years, and then I started my own company, producing corporate films, educational films, information type of films, which taught me how to communicate using films. And all the time I felt that the reason why I did this was because one day I would try to make films that exposed some of these topics, which really has been my main interest. And luckily my wife has also had the same interest, so we kind of teamed up on this project, doing these films together with my son, now in the 30s. So we have this small company called New Paradigm Films, doing documentaries on these topics, and well, in parallel to the other milk and bread work we do for corporations, because we have to make a living. You don't make a living on doing films like this, but it's extremely interesting. And we have been lucky to have had some sponsors who have made it possible for us to do these productions. But anyway, in the early 2000s, I was exposed to this special, very strange phenomenon going on, particularly in England. So we went there and tried to find out what in the world this was. These patterns, these formations were just outstanding. And there was nothing in my mind that could explain how this could have been made by people, because they were so huge, so complicated, and always so perfect, and never the same symbol 2 times after each other. So, and especially when I saw a video that was captured in 1996, showing supposedly the making of one. This video from shot right outside Devices in Britain. I guess many of you have seen it before. Of course, this is a very controversial video. It has there's been a lot of discussion if this is real or not. The guy who shot it claimed to have, well, he was in a pub in the afternoon and asked for if anyone would join him on a night's watch. It was raining, so nobody did. He went out, and he came back the next afternoon with this footage. Now, people say that he has obviously made this because he found this crop circle, and then he went to a studio or whatever and did an animation and then presented it in the afternoon. Well, today that might have been possible, but not in 1996 with the type of equipment we had then. Just a rendering of this video would have taken days. So to me, I'm still very confused if this is real or if it's a fake. I tend to believe it's real, but well, no one knows. But anyway, this resulted in our film about the crop circles, eller korncirkler, som vi ser på norsk, which has been sold all over the world, even been published in China. So that was a very interesting experience. Today I have maybe a little different view on the whole crop circle situation. I know now that many of these are made by people because it's a very popular thing to try to copy. But I still believe that the original phenomenon that surfaced in the early 80s is still responsible for many of these formations. But anyway, in Norway we have this special place called Hessdalen. And this triggered my interest as well. In the early 80s, a very strange phenomenon started to appear here. Lights were seen in the skies periodically, night after night. Often it was so regular that you could kind of adjust your watch after it. And a lot of people went to see it. And I'll go into this a little bit later in my talk to show you some more details. But this light was captured on camera. It moved very fast, and when you try to capture something on camera at night with long exposure times, it appears like this. But these lights were very often seen. And we went there and did a documentary on this in 2008 called The Portal, because I felt maybe after have interviewed all the people that live there are not more than 120 people living in this small valley. But they have all seen this and they've seen a lot of other stuff. So it seemed to me that, well, maybe this is some kind of portal. But I'll get back to that later. But it was still the global UFO phenomenon that was kind of the most intriguing to me. And this paper from 1947, I'm sure you all know it, I couldn't leave my mind. And also the stories that came in the early 60s, people that were being so-called abducted, or people that claimed to have been abducted. You know, it started with Betty and Barney Hill, that revealed a fascinating story in 1963, I guess it was. This was extremely intriguing to me, and I decided, after we had done the thing on Hessdalen, to try to do a proper documentary on the whole UFO situation. And luckily we were sponsored by a Norwegian industrial owner, actually one of my customers who's also very interested in these topics. So he made it possible for us to travel and interview people. And during 4 years we interviewed, I would say somewhere between 70 and 80 people on these topics. When I met Edgar Mitchell, he said, and told him that we were going to do, because he was in Oslo, and I said, is it possible to do an interview with you sometime? Because we're trying to make a documentary on the UFO phenomenon, trying to cover the whole thing, try to see it in a kind of larger perspective. And he said, okay, you're very welcome, but I have to tell you this, you are stepping into a minefield. And a minefield it was. And I must say that many of the people that we interviewed are still quietly resting on my hard drive, because there is a lot of confusing information in this field. There are people who use this phenomenon to get self-exposure. It's a very easy way to get attention. If you say that you have been up in a UFO, of course a lot of people will ridicule you, laugh at you, but there's always some who take you seriously. And I've met some of these people who claim to have done this or to have been in contact with, and after a while you see that this is more kind of fantasy, hallucination, or even maybe type of psychosis. So it's not easy to know what information can you trust and what information should you not trust. And there also is obviously a lot of disinformation because someone wants you not to take this seriously. But anyway, a lot of these interviews were by people who were, to me, seemed very credible, sensible people. They did not come running after me and said, hi, do you want to hear about my UFO experience? Most of them, you had to kind of pull it out of them because they didn't want to talk about it. It had cost them too much. Well, they kind of experienced that the world was hostile to this phenomenon and did not want, and they didn't want to talk about it because it just caused them pain. But some of them did talk, some of the experiences, and I guess I have talked to at least 20 or 25 people who have claimed to been in UFOs and who are people that I really trust and believe, and I have no reason to believe that they are making this up. But anyway, that's also a topic that we're going to cover later. So this resulted in this film we call The Day Before Disclosure, Dagen før avsløringen på skandinavisk. We did that, it was released 2010, and just to give you an idea of what we're working on now, a film that probably is going to be released early 2015 is what film we call The Concepts, the merging of science and spirituality into a new understanding of reality, or the nature of reality, which is kind of my favorite topic at the moment, because there's so much new science that are telling us that the way we perceive reality is actually quite different from how it really is. And that's also something that we're going to cover a little bit later in this. But back to this Day Before Disclosure, let's have a look at some of the people that we met there.
What if we were not alone? What if the hundreds of thousands of people claiming to have seen unidentified flying objects in fact had been witnessing extraterrestrial spacecraft? What if the thousands of people all over the world who tell about their encounters with alien beings through friendly contact or even forced abductions were actually telling the truth? What if our governments had known about an ET presence for more than half a century? If they were in possession of alien technology that had the potential of changing how our world is run? And they chose to keep the public in the dark through a secret campaign of suppressed information. What if that campaign acted as a chain around the ankles of humanity, keeping us from rising to a whole new level of consciousness and understanding of ourselves, our planet, and the universe around us? And what if that campaign ended tomorrow?
They could stop, they could absolutely stand still, and they could go Mach 10 or more at any time. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was not of this earth.
And it was at least twice the size of a 747, like two Boeing 747 airliners nose to tail.
They were about 4 feet tall. They had that same large cranial structure, the giant black sweeping eyes, almost no nose, a hint of a mouth.
I know there are craft. I know those craft have shut down nuclear missiles. I know they're seen over bases,
proportion
military
of
bases.
UFO sightings that cannot be explained in convention.
The little ones took me to the door, let go of my hand, and I walked on board the craft with these two tall, blonde.
I recalled going into the craft. I recalled an examination, being on a table. I recalled seeing a lot of equipment. I recalled another being besides the Greys in the background that appeared to be supervising the abduction, the event, and the examination.
She woke up one morning and there was no pregnancy.
The President of the United States, the titular leader of the free world, himself cannot get to UFO information, which leads, of course, to the
I've
question.
concluded that there are many different kinds of beings that come from elsewhere in the cosmos. And these beings of many different types have their own agenda.
First, the evidence is overwhelming that planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. In other words,
the scientific community is relentlessly hostile It's not that they're puzzled or even just skeptical. They are relentlessly hostile to the subject, and increasingly so over the years.
Case, when we've got clear ground evidence, the cow.
In 1947 at Roswell, that technology would be so superior to human technology.
We are being visited and have been visited by alien spacecraft and alien beings, and our governments around the world have covered it up.
There's no question in my mind. I'm a journalist. I've been a journalist for almost 40 years. And I know because I've seen them, because I've seen creatures.
They didn't really know what they were dealing with. They also did not understand the technologies. And I think that they also didn't know why these visitors were here. For example, the big increase in all the sightings around the world happened at the time when we began to detonate nuclear weapons. This is not an accident.
Found the object is covered with a biological membrane which seems to prevent the...
I think what we are seeing in the United States is a transition from an earlier policy of official denial to a new policy of openness.
UFOs exist, they come from outside this planet, and it's time to do something about it.
It's one of these currents of history that won't be denied. The truth is going to come out, and when it does, it's going to be explosive.
So once we get that out, we will go back and completely reassemble the 20th century, rewrite it in a way, and may have to go back and rewrite a significant portion of the entire last 12,000 years.
This is the greatest story in human history. And the reason it is the greatest story in human history, it is the greatest story of human history.
Well, thank you. I just have to say this, to your information, it's possible to buy the DVD on the back there. Usually it's 250 crowns. Today we do it for 100. And we got several of the other DVDs as well, if you want to bring some of them with you home. But anyway, these were some of the folks on this film. And as I said, we did a lot of interviews. Some of them we couldn't use, but many of them we found to be very valuable and very upright, and people that we trusted. And it's, you know, when you hear someone telling stories about this topic, it's if you have a little experience in life, to put it that way, you pretty soon can get a kind of gut feeling is this a fantasy or a psychosis, or is this someone telling something that for them is a real experience? And we just had to use our own kind of psychological evaluation methods. Not very professional, but even though we found that this actually worked for us. So the people that are exposed in the film are people that I at least trust. What you would find is, of course, very much up to you. But I want to show you just a couple of clips from people that we interviewed. So let's start with one guy that actually we made great contact with. I think he's a great guy. He's one of those who have really done an enormous job for the whole topic and bringing it forward. So let's just listen to Stephen Greer for some minutes.
It's a very good question. Why has there been this secrecy? And I think in the early days, I'm talking the 1930s, 1940s, they didn't really know what they were dealing with. They also did not understand the technologies. And I think that they also didn't know why these visitors were here. For example, the big increase in all the sightings around the world happened at the time when we began to detonate nuclear weapons. This is not an accident. And I've been told by senior intelligence officials that essentially a big red flag went up over our planet saying we were in trouble. But not only are we in trouble, but we could be a threat to others, because you combine going into space, the early stages of space travel, and the use of hydrogen bombs and nuclear weapons, and a civilization on Earth that was still very violent, as you look around the Earth even today, of course. So this is something that any enlightened or even self-interested civilization observing the Earth, which I think we've been under observation for thousands of years, would be greatly concerned. But our military and government were completely shocked by this and didn't know what to do with it. I think that's the early, but later, I understand, of course, President Eisenhower wanted to make an announcement about this after he had a meeting near Edwards Air Force Base in 1954. But he was prevented from doing so by what he later called the military-industrial complex, because the interests for secrecy are really fall into three broad areas. One is the inertia of the secrecy. Once you start something secret and you have made so many lies and frankly killed so many people and threatened so many people, and you've lied to Congress and you've lied to presidents, how do you bring this out? They painted themselves into a black box, black corner. The other, so that's the inertia. The other is that there were Orthodox religious interests that did not know what to make of this. And I've had discussions with senior levels at the Vatican to discuss this. And today, most mainstream religious groups would say, well, there's one supreme being in the universe, and there are many children of God, and we're all children of God. This is what Monsignor Balducci said when we interviewed him at the Vatican. But the Orthodox and fundamentalists would view this in a very disturbing way, because it would upset their worldview. And I think then the biggest became the technological and scientific end of this. Once we retrieved, back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, several of these extraterrestrial vehicles, and began to study them, we combined that knowledge with knowledge we already had, because remember, we had some people like T. Townsend Brown and the B-Field-Brown effect who were studying anti-gravity, quite independent of this issue, back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. But when their information got combined with studying these spacecraft, they figured out, this is how they're working. And they realized it's the end of oil. It's the end of the need for coal. It's the end of the combustion engine, the internal combustion engine. It's the end of transmission lines for electricity, because the energy that these spaceships are using, what people call UFOs, we don't call them, no one in the business calls them UFOs. They are not unidentified and they don't fly. Yeah, we'll get to this. But these objects are extracting energy from the fabric of space, okay, around, not outer space, but the fabric of space. And in fact, even the early Lockheed and Northrop experimental spaceships that we have built, and we're talking 1950s and 60s, were called flux liners, because they were pulling energy from the quantum flux field, what's called the quantum flux field that's in the space in this room. And every cubic centimeter of space, for example, in this room has enough energy to run the Earth for a day. It's a huge amount of energy. And so once this was really figured out by the mid-50s, long time ago, 50 years ago, they knew that this would be the end of the oil cartels and the international financial petrodollar system, and a huge amount of the industrialists would then have to change their whole way of operating. Because think about it. What happens when every village in India or sub-Saharan Africa can have a device that looks like a generator, and it's extracting energy from this quantum flux field? Suddenly, you have an economic growth all over the world. And this is a wonderful thing. It would be the end of poverty. But it would also be the end of the economic hegemony, where Europe and America, with 600 million people, dominate the whole global economy of 6 billion. So this is a huge geopolitical problem. And so the issue isn't about just money, it's about power. Who has the power? How the Earth is run? Who is running Earth?
Well, this is just a clip from his interview, and I've got the whole interview. It's a 1-hour interview, also on tape back or DVD back there if some of you want it. But of course, he touches very many of the most central issues in this whole phenomenon or this whole environment. And Stephen Greer, of course, is a believer that much of this is coming from outside our planet. I know also that he believes that what some of these things are kind of mixes with things that come outside and that are generated inside this planet by so-called underground military industrial complexes. And so it's, to him, as I understand, it's a kind of a mix, and it's not easy to know what is what. But I think some of the points that he's making are very essential. So let's listen to another guy that I also actually grew very fond of. He is a retired professional military man called Bob Dean, and he, I guess many of you know this story, but he was stationed in Paris in 1963 when NATO had its base in Paris, and he was given very high credentials. And when he arrived there, he learned something that really shocked him about this issue. That was actually the first time he had contact with these types of things. So let's just listen to what he says.
And when I arrived in the summer of 1963, my clearance was upgraded to cosmic top secret, which was then and still is today the highest level of classification in NATO. And when I arrived in the summer of '63, I learned of a study that was underway that had been initiated in 1961. Apparently, an event had occurred on the morning of 2nd February 1961 that almost triggered World War III. A large number of circular metallic discs flying in formation flew out of the Soviet sector over the Allied sector and a divided Germany, flew off to the west. They turned north over the Channel, over the English Channel, over the southern coast of England, and then they turned north and disappeared off of NATO radar over the Norwegian Sea, off the coast of Norway. Well, this incident almost triggered World War III because the Soviets, we found out, thought those objects belonged to us. And for a time, we thought they might belong to the Soviets. We were to find out that they didn't belong to either of us, the Soviets or us, that it was a real story here. And they initiated a study in '61 to determine what in the world is happening here. They concluded after this 3-year study that the planet Earth and the human race apparently had been under some kind of survey or observation for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, by several extraterrestrial advanced intelligences. Now that literally, Terry, blew me out of the water.
Yeah. So, I mean, of course he has to speak for himself, but personally I have no reason to believe that he's making this up. But what he's saying is that NATO already back in the 60s were very much aware of this situation. A couple of days back, NATO had a new Secretary General, and he's the former Norwegian Prime Minister. You had your former Prime Minister as a Secretary General. But Jens Stoltenberg, who is now the new Prime Minister, or the new Secretary General, he's a very open-minded guy. And I can assure you that the next time I meet him, I have met him several times, I'm going to ask him this question, if he has anything interesting to tell about this issue, off the record, hopefully. So I look forward to that. But Another guy that we, to put it that way, really grew very fond of was, of course, Edgar Mitchell. He's kind of the grand old man, both in NASA but also in the UFO community, due to his very special and open-minded views on how things are put together. And he's also pretty convinced that things have been covered up for a very long time. He had a special experience when he was in space, which resulted in him creating the Institute of Noetic Sciences when he got back from space, because he felt that his molecules in his body, when he was looking out of the window from the small capsule, he felt that the molecules in his body was actually a part of all the molecules he could see in the enormously bright sky of stars outside this small spaceship. And he got so touched by that experience that he decided to use the rest of his life after he left NASA to explore consciousness. Because to him, consciousness is the ground, the source of everything. And that's the topic of the Noetic Sciences, to try to study the effects of consciousness and go more deeply into this, which is also kind of the main theme in the film that we're releasing next year. But anyway, we met him several times, and in 2009, we were at a conference in Washington at the Press Club. Some of the guys here were there as well. Robert, you remember that? And Edgar Mitchell gave a small talk, which I want to share with you.
About 10 years ago, and I can't remember what date it was right now, when the disclosure movement was going strongly, I came here to Washington with a Navy commander by the name of Will Miller and Dr. Stephen Greer, and we were able to get an appointment at the Pentagon to talk about what we knew, or what we allegedly knew, what we thought we knew, and went and told our story. And the powers that be at the Intelligence Committee of the Joint Chiefs of Staff listened to our story and said, the Admiral said, well, I don't know that story. I don't know that that's true, but I will find out. So we departed, went on our way, and subsequently learned through Dr. Greer and through Will Miller, and that those stories had been confirmed, and that the Admiral had been denied access when he tried to get into the inner workings of that process. And we had confirmation of that, although that Admiral now denies the fact that this is the fact. So my story is essentially that. I do have no firsthand experience with the ET effort, except the fact that I know all of these research people that you'll hear from today, and some who are not here today, who have spent a long amount of their lives and time doing research into the alien visitation, UFO crashes, and so forth. And I urge that those who are doubtful read the books, read the lore, and start to understand what has really been going on, because there is no doubt we are being visited. And as a person who is a part of the first generation of being a spacefarer of our civilization and having gone to the moon, and realizing that I do, and many of us do now, that have seen the Hubble pictures from space, the universe that we live in is much more wondrous, exciting, complex, and far-reaching than we were ever able to know up to this point in time. And so our destiny, in my opinion, and we might as well get started with it, is become a part of the planetary community of nations, of planets, just like when we were much newer on this planet, and we found tribes over in the next valley or across the next mountains, and we started forming communities then and reaching out beyond ourselves. At this point in human history on this planet, we're now starting, and ready should be, to reach out beyond our planet and beyond our solar system to find out what is really going on out there. And what I am suggesting is it is now time to put away this embargo of truth about the alien presence. And I call upon our government to open up like other governments have, and you will hear about that this morning, like the Belgians have, the French have, the Brazilians have, the Argentines, the Mexicans have all released their files. It's about time now that we do the same thing and become a part of this planetary community that is now trying to take our proper role as spacefaring civilization. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, right after this presentation, Edgar Mitchell was interviewed by CNN. You see the guy from CNN here in the camera? You see Robert in the background there, actually. And he was telling the same story to them, and he urged them to take this seriously and to give a serious presentation on this on CNN. And here is the result the same afternoon.
While Mr. Obama is under fire for making those torture memos public, he's coming under pressure to release some very different records. That call is coming from UFO enthusiasts. If you think it sounds like science fiction, you may be surprised by who agrees with them. Jim Acosta joins us from Washington to bring this matter crashing back down to earth. So the truth may be out there, possibly. Is the president entertaining this notion?
Well, he did during the campaign. The question is not alien to the president, Angela. You've heard about the scores of special interest groups appealing to President Obama in his first 100 days in office. Now you can add believers in UFOs to the list. To believers in UFOs, the truth isn't out there, it's in there. So they're calling on President Obama to end what they insist is a government cover-up of the existence of extraterrestrials.
Will you release these records? Will you release all documents?
Documents they claim exist and prove there is life in outer space. President Obama is awfully busy these days.
I know.
Do you think he has time for this?
Well, I would say the fact that we are not alone in the universe is one of the more important aspects of our time.
Former Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon, told the National Press Club he's convinced. But there isn't convincing proof that's going to convince the entire world at this point.
That is correct. That is what we're trying to open up.
We're about to go out and do our little hoax.
Equally committed are UFO skeptics. Earlier this year, 2 skeptics set off weather balloons that people in New Jersey mistook for alien spacecraft. The pranksters showed up on the local news, pretending to be eyewitnesses.
And all of a sudden, we see these lights literally zip over our car.
They later admitted it was all a hoax and paid a $250 fine for creating a disturbance.
Again, we're not trying to prove or disprove anything, but it's okay to be skeptical.
Be open-minded counter UFO believers, pointing to former White House Chief of Staff and former Obama transition team head John Podesta.
It's time to find out what the truth really is that's out there.
It's a question President Obama has fielded before.
The 3 astronauts of Apollo 11 who went to the moon back in 1969 all said that they believe there is life beyond Earth. Do you agree?
You know, I don't know, and I don't presume to know. What I know is there is life here on Earth, and that we're not attending to life here on Earth.
It depends on what these aliens were like, and whether they were Democrats or Republicans.
Last year, the British government opened up its files on UFOs, and as for John Podesta, he's still sticking to the belief that the government knows more than what it's telling about UFOs. He's released a statement to CNN saying the government should open its files. The American people can handle the truth. Angeli?
How great is the opposition to the opening of this Pandora's box, Jim?
Well, you know, I don't know if there is much opposition to this. It's hard to tell. You know, if you listen to the believers in UFOs, they say that there is great opposition to open up these files inside the federal government, and they point to John Podesta as Exhibit A, as somebody who has been inside the White House at the upper echelons of power, as somebody who believes there are these files out there and that they should be released to the public. And we do know from the British government that those files exist at least on the other side of the Atlantic because they opened up their files. So the UFO believers, they're a committed bunch. They've been trying for years and years at this, and they've had some success overseas. They're trying to do the same here at home. They're hoping that a change in the White House will result in the change that they're looking for at this point. They believe in Mr. Obama just as much as they believe in UFOs at this point, Angelique.
Okay then. Jim, thank you very much indeed for that. Jim Acosta there.
You bet.
Well, this is how the subject is treated in the media. And of course, when media covers this subject, they always have to, excuse me, try to keep a balance. So they have to interview or expose some skeptics as well as these hoaxers. And just to, you know, they have to cover their back, of course. So, and I think that's one of the things that probably are the reasons why many people don't take this seriously, because the media are very reluctant to spell things out in clear words. At least those in the media who actually take this seriously. They always have to come up with an opposite story that kind of balances it. But okay, it's better than nothing, of course. But let's move from the US over to this part of the Atlantic, where we have been more open to this. I also have learned that you in Denmark have opened some of your files. Norwegian government has not done it, but a lot of other governments have done it, and of course Britain has done it several years back, and that when they started releasing their files, it kind of exploded on the internet. So that was a very good thing. But still, there are people who really know this very well say that the most interesting stories that are covered by the military are not exposed. It's only the stories, or most of the stories, come from the civil population. But anyway, let's move over to Hessdalen. This small town in Norway, which is like 10 miles south of Trondheim. You know, Trondheim is almost in the middle of Norway. You go 10 miles south, you come to another larger town called Røros, which is an old mining town where they have been mining copper for like 400 years. Copper that they sent to the Danish king, of course, at that time. But now this area is very rich of minerals. And this valley Hessdalen, which is like a 20 minutes drive to the west of Røros, still is in the same area where all this copper is. So this small valley that goes up from a larger valley, it lies in the mountains. It's about like 500-600 meters above sea level. It has on the left side of the valley is not more than 4 kilometers long. On the left side there's a lot of copper, on the right side there's a lot of iron and zinc. And in the middle of the valley there's a river, and beside the river is a very old sulfur mines. So this is a very mineral-rich valley. Maybe that has something to do with what has happened here. But over the years, very strange things have been seen. And it started all in 1981, in December, when people suddenly started to see a lot of lights, especially at night, of course, easier to see then. And it attracted a lot of attention, and after a few months, the military came to try to find out what this was. The Norwegian Broadcasting was there and filmed it. Later on, there came people from television stations all over the world, from Japan, from several places in Europe. And of course, a lot of tourists went up to see what it was. But fortunately, at that time, I was not able to go there, but I've been there several times afterwards. This phenomenon first appeared as just a light traveling up and down the valley. As I said earlier, it was very regular. Often it appeared 8 o'clock in the evening, came back 2 hours later, like almost some type of transport. The light sometimes was very large. It could sometimes stop and light up all the valley, And one guy measured it to be more than a megawatt of intensity. And he said it was the thing that emitted the light was almost as big as a house. And it could stay absolutely still for almost an hour. And he said, how in the world can something emit a megawatt of light without seemingly no cord? Where did the energy come from? So the energy issue here has been of great importance. But there has also been a lot of other sightings showing not only lights, but also big physical objects. So we did a documentary on this, finished 2008, where we interviewed a lot of people in the valley, a lot of the researchers. The Norwegian university, one of the Norwegian universities have established an own 24/7 exploration unit inside a container, and they've shot a lot of pictures that you'll see. So let's just see from one of the surveys they had, because this university sometimes brings students in September, October. They also bring school kids to try to kind of ignite their interest for physics, because when they are out here and looking for this light, they get very interested in physics and all that kind of stuff. So in this particular situation, that is the opening of this film, there were pupils from this school, like 14, 15 years old, together with a lot of students. We were sitting on a mountaintop, and things started to happen.
Det er helt utrolig spennende å få være med på dette prosjektet.
Hva var det for noe?
De fulgte hverandre parallelt med veldig stor avstand.
Jeg dater raskt nedover med diverse farger av hvit og rød over. Hver gang 310 grader over. Hva er det står der? Det er et lys som blinker, som
Å, Ville!
Å, fy fader! Jeg filmer det! Jeg har det på tape! Jeg har det her! Å, dæven! Fy faen, det bare brent opp!
Det lyser med en fantastisk intensitet opp til 1 megawatt. Har det vært beregnet at dette her lyser ut. Det lyser lenge. Hvor i all verden er ledningen da? Hvor er drivstofftanken som klarer å få dette her til å lyse? Det er like stort som et hus nå av det.
Hessdalen, this remote mountain valley in Norway, 30 kilometers north of the mining town Røros, has a population of only 120. There was once 4 times as many people living here, but today many homes are empty. But why is there a blue container placed far up on one of the hillsides, with cameras covering the valley? Is there something going on in Hessdalen of an unusual character?
The light phenomena here in Hessdalen in Norway started in late 81, with a lot of sightings. At the most it was 20 sightings a week. The local people here started to see the light down in the valley, sometimes close to their houses. And they was wondering, what could this be? And some was a little bit afraid too, because no one could give them any answer. What could it be? And this became known for the public through newspapers, etc. And people started to go up here and see if they could see it for themselves. And many people did.
Men da sto vi 30-40 personer og kikket. Og plutselig kom da dette lyset gjennom skydekket og ned langs fjellsiden. Og stoppet rett foran oss og seig forbi. Og vi fulgte den med blikket, og nede i dalen lenger frem sto det et lys og ventet på den. Og i det øyeblikk falt jo alle mine teorier om fly, meteoritt, kulelyn. For det første var det jo ikke noe lyd fra dette her. Dette her var helt uforståelig.
A long oval-shaped light phenomenon appeared to be landing. It came up the valley, along the mountainside, stopped and rotated slowly.
Så reiste den seg opp, så den står som en stake oppe på fjellet. Og da var det akkurat som når du ser inn i sola, så ser du en silhuett inn i det lyset.
This picture is taken with 1/60th of a second exposure.
The phenomena behaves very different. Some is moving very slowly, and some lights can move very fast. The fastest speed we have ever measured was 30,000 kilometers an hour. And we have also recorded the slower speed. We have also recorded on the radar something moving without being seen by a light, so it's invisible, but it's a strong recording on the radar, so it's actually there is something which is moving around.
Yeah, so this light, which actually is still going on, were seen by many people, and as you saw, Erling Strand, who is been kind of the head of the Norwegian scientific group, and still is. He was a young man back then. Today he's a grown man. It's almost 30 years later, but he's still doing this. And they found out after a while that they would not call this a UFO, because they were to do all these scientific, this exploration work. They needed, of course, funding, and it was much easier to get funding both from the university, to get equipment from the military, and to get money from different types of organizations if you call this an unknown natural phenomenon. So they decided to call it the Hessdalen phenomenon, an unknown possible energy source. And to this day, this is still what they call it. As I said, the locals have seen other things pointing in the direction of there also being physical things here, probably something looking like craft. So many people believe that maybe it's two types of phenomena. Maybe it's kind of a natural phenomenon which we doesn't know what is, and maybe this phenomenon has something to do with an extraterrestrial phenomenon. Some people even have the idea that because of all the minerals in this valley and of all this energy maybe being there, maybe this is kind of a place where extraterrestrials charge their batteries, like we charge our batteries with the Tesla, you know. You have different places where you can charge your car. Maybe this is a place where they charge their interdimensional spacecraft, for example. Well, who knows? But anyway, they put up this blue box or this container in the mid-90s. And after a while, it started to shoot pictures automatically. And they also put up a camera. So let's see what they caught on the camera and on. on the different cameras.
Supported by the Østfold University, the world's first 24/7 observatory for light phenomena is established in Hessdalen. With the generous help from one of the local farmers, a large, well-equipped container was placed on one side of the valley. Radar and instruments for measuring electromagnetic noises run continuously, along with video recorders that are activated as soon as unusual aerial movements are detected. Excitement is running high. Will it now be possible to capture the phenomenon on these new instruments?
Vi fikk opp denne her i august måned i 98, og da var det jo bare ett kamera her oppe. Og allerede etter noen dager så tok den sitt første fenomen.
Each minute, the still cameras shoot overviews covering the valley and upload to the internet. Several observations of the phenomenon have been obtained from these cameras all year round. But what about the video cameras? After a year's tense wait, it finally happens. The Hessdalen phenomenon is caught on camera. Zooming in and slowing down the film shows something really astonishing. A second light seems to appear from underneath, joining the main light. How could this be interpreted? This footage brings the Hessdalen research to a new era.
Yeah. They have, unfortunately, they haven't caught things on the video camera as good as this. This was actually the best recording they've had on the light moving. And, but they're still recording. And as he said, in the beginning there was like 20 sightings a week back in the 80s and early 90s. Now it's more like 20 or 30 sightings a year. But of course, there might be things there that are not observed. And if you go up there, you might be lucky. I've been lucky at least one time when I saw it myself. We were sitting on a mountaintop and suddenly it was like someone blew off a big flash, like an electronic flash right above us. And I had a lot of cameras, 3 video cameras, 1 still camera sitting there waiting for something to happen. But when I saw this enormous flash over my head, looked up and I see these 2 bulbs of light. It was hard to say if it was like 100 meters or a kilometer or even a mile above my head because it was just the black starry sky above. But I could see these 2 bulbs moving in parallel for 20 seconds, and then they suddenly just shot into the great cosmos. And I was so disturbed or whatever, so shocked that I forgot to start my cameras, of course, which irritated me immensely afterwards. But that's how it goes. When you see this, and that's one of the things that's one of the reasons why UFOs seldom appear on pictures, because it happens very suddenly and you're not prepared, and just in a few seconds it's all over. And if you're lucky to catch it, usually it's a very blurry kind of picture. So it's not a phenomenon that is very easy to study. At least for private people, you need proper equipment, which they have now in Hessdalen. But the locals, apart from the light, the locals have also other stories, and let's listen to a couple of them.
På Vårhus det i grend lenger bort der. Åge skulle vei og kjøre tømmer ned på elven der en kveld med snøskutere. Så jeg skulle vei følge og hjelpe jeg også, for det var mørkt om kvelden og måneskinn og fint vær. Og så hadde han ikke noe tømmer der han. Så jeg skulle vei og hente en ny last. Så jeg skulle rulle de tømmerstokkene på plass, og det gjorde jeg. Så jeg satte meg opp på tømmerstokkene og koset meg der til måneskinnet med en røk og det, og satt og stirret. Og der fikk jeg se det kom i lys ifra sø. Helt stilt, det var ingen lyd eller noe. Og det kom imellom meg og det Granum der. Og det er ikke noe langt unna der jeg var. Og Det var 2 lys på det der som kom, men jeg så det var en farekost, altså. Det var, ja, du kan tenke deg i kneippbrød som flatt på ned, altså at det kuves opp slik. Så var det ikke lys nemme frempå der, og ikke lite rann oppå. Så det var ikke noe fly det, nei. Men hva det var, det vet ikke vi ennå.
Vi bevitnes på at vi har sett dessverre 68 observasjoner. Og det nedskrevet, ja.
Og når var de siste observasjonene?
11. juni. Det nå i 2006. Og det var ca. 30 varmegrader i sola den dagen. Og helt klar himmel. Og da så vi som en sylinder over fjellet her. Men så rare med det, den observasjonen, det var at sola skjer ikke på der sylinderen på sørsida, der hun skulle skjenne, men på nordsida, der det skulle være skygge.
Jeg kjørte opp med bussen om morgenen når hun var...
Yeah. Fortunately, we don't have time to go into all of these, but many people claim to have seen things looking like big men's hats, large things. And this particular picture is a description made by a woman who was driving up with a car, and suddenly something flew over the car and lighted up the surroundings like this. And also they have in Hessdalen found places where big pieces of turf or have been taken out of the ground, cut out big pieces like 4 times 2 meters, lifted off the ground. It was cut with laser precision, weighing some 2 tons, and put on to the side, like cut with a knife, and no tracks of any machinery. This particular place where they found it first was 2 hours walk from the nearest road in the middle of the mountains. There was some hunters who found it. You can see pictures of this in the film. The film is also in the back there. But anyway, very many strange things has happened in Hessdalen and still do. So if you have time, it's absolutely worth a visit, and the place is very nice. If you like to have a nice walk in nature, in the mountains, it's a wonderful place to go. It's very beautiful up there. Okay, in 2007, there was a big survey with students, and the light that we saw in the beginning here was from that survey. But they also caught something on a still camera, and I want to share with you some of the analysis that one of the researchers from the university, Bjørn Gitle Hauge, has given on that. But first of all, he explains a little bit about the equipment. And when we see him now, he's in a small camping laboratory. They have made a kind of a laboratory or put up different types of instruments in a small camping wagon. And he's explaining how they explore things there.
Hovedpoenget med utstyret her jo å detektere noe som spesielt ved Hessdalsfenomenet. Vi leter jo et eller annet som skiller dette lyset fra alt mulig annet. Så den første her, det kamerasystemet her, det tar bilder med veldig lang åpningstid, pluss at det har et spektralgitter foran. Så vi kan få se et optisk spekter og få fingeravtrykket til fenomenet.
Så du det?
Ja, se, der det. Der det.
Der det. Syns du ute? Fy faen, har du sett?
Der ja! Hei, det beveger seg! Hei!
Oi!
Sjekk!
Sjekk det nå!
Sjekk! Vi har hatt et lysfenomen i peiling 312 grader, og det lyste i fjellsida i den retningen der innenpå et minutt. Yes, this spectacular picture was shot from Rogne Mountain, approximately in 1,000 meters altitude towards west, and it started to happen things at approximately 9:30 in the evening, when the Aurora Borealis first started the show. And then we suddenly had a lot of flashes in the valley, and then some huge lights that suddenly turned out and moved with a very high speed north-south in the valley. And
one spectacular happening was 1 minute before 10 in the evening. Then we had a big light that started out and moved very quickly north and south and gave us this very, very impressive picture, which possibly is the best picture ever taken of the Hessdalen phenomenon.
Yeah, so this picture showing this phenomenon moving, covering a distance of about 1 kilometer, it was moving back and forth in just like 20 seconds exposure, and they also had this special filter in front of the camera giving this spectral. And what they could read out from this spectral, the analysis showed that one of the materials that created that light was from a mineral called scandium, which is a extremely seldom and very hard metal, almost like diamond. And one of the places where it is used is actually in the nose of the MiG fighters in Russia. But this was not a MiG fighter because it went back and forth like this. And the analysis have been looked at very, very critically and has given some ideas of what this could be, but it still hasn't solved the problem. So it still is a mystery what this is, but it's obviously that something is going on there. It is scientifically recorded, and it can be monitored. You can study it yourself if you're lucky. And even the great, one of the great early explorers in this field, J. Allen Hynek, who was US responsible for Project Blue Book in the US, he was up here in the 80s, and he said Hessdalen is just like a UFO laboratory. Things happen here and you can explore it. It's one of the few places on Earth where that's possible. Well, my time is running out, so we have to move on to the last topic, which, yeah, I just want to show you this. This is a picture from a Norwegian newspaper 2 weeks back. They found 2 cows in the west part of Norway, not very far from Hessdalen, with this type of injury. And they could not figure out what kind of animal could have made this damage to a cow. So there was a lot of noise going on about this in the media, and no one could really figure out what it is. To me, it looks very much like what we have seen much of in the United States, and also many other places on the globe where these so-called animal mutilations have taken place. Things are cut off animals, especially the lips, nose, with laser precision, uncovering the bone structure. This has happened many, many times. What this is, who does it, who knows? It does not look very human, or it does not look like an animal that does it. But this is still happening in Norway. I just needed to mention that. But abductions is maybe the topic that has fascinated me the most, and I want to spend the last half hour talking about that. I hope you still are comfortable with that. This is a topic which is very controversial, of course. It's when you move into this topic, you really are jumping off a cliff, because it rocks or it disturbs all your established belief systems about how reality is. We live in a 3-dimensional world where we can observe with our 5 senses. We have kind of good control over what's going on around us. But to people who claim to have had these types of experiences, reality has shown itself from a very, very different, type or size. And I want to share with you some stories from the people who have both experienced it, and also from one of the most known researchers. David Jacobs, Dr. David Jacobs from Temple University, and also Bud Hopkins of New York. And of course, you probably also know Dr. John Mack, who was one of the pioneers in this field from Harvard University. He was a psychiatrist, and when he learned that many of his patients had the similar type of experiences, he really went into this and was kind of convinced that this was not normal hallucinations or psychosis. And he was kicked out of Harvard University because of his studies. Well, he found his way back after some years. And unfortunately, he was killed in a car accident in London some years back. I had met him a couple of times before that, talked to him, but I'd never had the opportunity to interview him. But I've met with both Bud Hopkins and Dr. Jacobs. So let's hear a little bit about what their opinion is about this.
My colleagues and I have heard directly from thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of people over the last 20 years about their abduction experiences. And so we know that this is a very, very, very prevalent phenomenon throughout, probably throughout the world.
The first thing I recalled was seeing 3 fingers and a thumb on a hand come towards me to pull me out of the van. I was more than a little frightened. I was quite traumatized by it. I was very awake, sitting up, and had no reference for this. I was removed from the van. My friend remained asleep beside me. And as I stood at the end of the van, there was a being that I could not look at, a very tall, what felt very large and very tall being standing in front of me, but I was not able to raise my head to look up. On each side of me, there was what I've since come to understand is referred to as grays, one on each side of me. My hands were hanging down at my sides, and they were, without touching me, with their hands underneath me, they were levitating me somehow off the ground, about 5 or 6 inches. I was fairly paralyzed, not able to look around. I could look down and see one at each side of me, and we began to move forward.
In a typical abduction scenario, a person is removed from his or her normal environment. They're taken on board a UFO. Their clothes are removed. They are placed on a table. An examination is given. We used to think the examination was the reason for the abduction. We've learned many years ago that the examination is never the reason for an abduction. There's certain physical, mental, and reproductive procedures that are run on people. They have this neurological engagement with these beings, these aliens, where they say that a person is staring at them, and they'll be staring at them from a distance of maybe an inch, or touching foreheads. They can't close their eyes. They can't turn their head away. They can't avert their gaze. They can't look away. And we've learned that what they're doing is connecting to the optic nerve and using that as a conduit to go to other neurological sites within the brain and do whatever it is necessary for them to do, which is to look at memories or to alter the person in a certain way, or whatever it is that they're doing. That happens always. It's constant. Sperm is taken. Eggs are removed. There's all sorts of other things that happens when they're on a table. Fetuses are implanted, little tiny embryos. Fetuses are removed. This is standard material. This is standard stuff. They're taken off the table or taken into another room. They might see a bunch of babies in the other room. They have to hold the baby. Women have to feed the baby sometimes. They might be taken into a room where they see well, let me just say that the babies that they see are strange-looking babies. They look sort of like half human, half alien. Sometimes they look more human, actually, but still odd. They're taken into a room where they see toddlers sometimes, kids who are maybe 2, 3, 4 years old, who are playing with some toys. They play with the children, play with the toys. The toys are unusual toys. They have these neurological staring procedures with the children who will look into their eyes very closely. They might have other procedures where they'll see a room filled with vats, jars, I should say, containers, clear glass or clear plastic or whatever, containers with fetuses in them in different stages of development. They will have all sorts of other procedures that happen to them. They're then taken back to their normal environment, put back where they were on the couch watching the television or whatever, and they forget immediately what happened to them. All they know is that they were watching one television show, and not only is that show over, but the next 2 shows are over with as well, and they're still sitting there, and maybe they put the can of beer in their hand, they still have the can of beer in their hand, and they figure, what happened? And then they just forget it. Can't explain it, and they just move on.
Well, how can Dr. Jacobs tell you all this? He told me when I visited him, this is 5 years back, that he has been, together with Bud Hopkins, doing more than 3,000 sessions with 3,000 different people who have claimed to have had these experiences, and they have developed this very special type of hypnosis. And they also have developed a very special way of filtering out people who are making things up. One of the things he said is that one of the first things we ask people when they come to us and claim that they have had this experience is we ask them what they had to eat. And we know that there has never been served anything to eat on board these craft. So if they say that we have this most delicious food, we know that that probably is a make-up story. So they have different kind of traps to try to sort out who is referring to real experiences and who is not. But anyway, they have gathered an enormous amount of material and written books about it. David Jacobs has had even his own course at the university about the UFO phenomenon for many years. And he says the administration at the university looks very much forward to me getting retired because they don't like this, but I have actually been able to do it for many years. But sadly, Bud Hopkins passed away a couple of years ago. He was one of the pioneers in this field as well, and let's hear what he says.
One person described a drawing of the table. She didn't put anybody on the table, but she described the aliens around the table. The regular little aliens were about her size. She was, I don't know, she was maybe 8 or something. But there was this one tall one. And that's usually the one who's sort of the one in charge.
Drawings of abductors have been made by many abductees, where the large eyes and the small cheek seems to be typical characteristics for the so-called gray alien, named after the skin tone.
See, one of the interesting things about this is that all the evidence we get confirms the reality of this over and over again. It doesn't disconfirm it.
The so-called hybrids, allegedly a blend of human beings and gray aliens, is today reported in a majority of the cases investigated.
Alien eyes, but with what seems to be a little girl who was the alien, the hybrid child.
A hybrid child.
Yeah. And what's interesting, again, the eyes are very peculiar.
Yeah.
The hair was not combed or brushed, and didn't really cover the head properly.
Okay.
And she's one of the mothers.
So what it seemed to be was that there was a program where people were picked up again and again and again as if they had been studied, they were being studied over their lifetimes. And they were sort of automatically part of a program which was genetic in function. And it seems that we discovered that if a person was having abduction experiences and had children of his or her own, normal human children, that often those children would also in turn become abductees, as if the aliens were studying a particular bloodline for perhaps psychological reasons, emotional reasons. We don't know exactly why, but they seem very interested in the way the minds worked of these people. The emotions, they don't seem to have the emotions that we have. And it was as if they wanted to kind of learn our range of emotions somehow. It seems as if, in a strange way, we're teaching them without being asked to. It's involuntary teaching, but we're being examples, as if they want the richness of the human spirit and the human emotional life to be somehow blended with their own incredible technological gifts.
Yeah, well, this is a point that many of these people mention that claim to have been abducted, that they feel that their emotional aspects, their emotional part, are the most interesting to these visitors. And the woman that we saw here, Nadine Lalich, she had this first experience back in 1991, almost 23 years ago, and she has since that time continuously been exposed to these experiences almost on a weekly basis sometimes. This first thing happened in Sedona, right outside Sedona, when she was camping with a friend, and she later moved to California and other places in the United States, but these things have been going on all the time with her. And she's, to me, meeting her is probably the most extraordinary experience I've ever had in this field, because what she is telling is absolutely mind-blowing. I have the whole interview on a tape back there, but she says that in the first years when this happened to her, she was kind of paralyzed. She was not able to move her legs and feet. She was just like paralyzed. And I asked her, what, if you, on a scale from 1 to 10, on which level of consciousness were you when this happened? She said, in the first years it was like level 2 or 3, but afterwards I have developed techniques to stay consciousness for more and longer times. And now I would say I'm up to 7 or 8. And she has, even over the past years, been able to start to communicate with some of these beings. And she also says that over the last years, especially the last 6 years, well, I just have to mention one thing. This woman is working in a law firm. She is absolutely, in my opinion, a very credible person. She had these experiences for over 20 years. 6 years ago, she wrote a book about it because she had to get this out. But she is a very down-to-earth, grounded person, and the way she's very reflective, and so just wanted to mention that. But she says that over the last years, she has been part of a program where there is one particular alien which she meets every time, and he is showing her pictures. She has different types of equipment attached to her body, and they kind of monitor her reactions to different types of pictures. Pictures of violent situations, pictures of very loving situations, and everything in between. So they're trying to figure out how I react to different kind of emotional stimuli. And we have been sitting in groups, she says, like 12 people, and they all monitor us at the same time, showing us things, and they want to study how we react to things. And also they bring us together with these hybrid babies, and she has also been through the process of having eggs removed. And at one particular time, she said she met a baby which she instantly knew was her hybrid daughter. And that to her was, when she told me this, she was crying immensely, and she was so touched by it, but she was absolutely sure that part of that creature came from her. And she said that baby had no type of emotional reactions as a human baby has. She later met this same baby or a child 10 or 12 years later when it was almost grown, and she said still she could feel an enormous attraction to it and felt extremely loving towards this child. This went on, and I just wanted to say this before we hear a portion of the interview, because I asked her, are these, what kind of creatures are these? Can you describe some of the creatures you have met? And this is what she says. The interview is very long, so fortunately I couldn't play much of it.
My initial experience has been, initially in the first few years of this, now mind you, I had no prior reference to this. Very little exposure to any, well, certainly no exposure to the study of this. But later on, some of the reference I got I gathered from MUFON, some of the other information I picked up. Initial contact would be what would be standardly called grays, 3.5 feet tall, gray type beings, automatons. They seem to operate together. They don't seem independent. They don't seem to be independent thinkers. They seem just almost programmed, robotic, to do certain tasks. There are some of those that they seem to have different. It seems as though they're carrying out activities at the direction of several other beings. One being the tall white that I refer to as the tall white, that seems very cold, removed in the background, analyzing, analytical, seems to have very little regard for human beings, almost a disdain for them. I've had no direct contact except to see them present in the background. And it seems as though the Greys are doing some type of work to the benefit or their direction. The other type of being I've seen has been what I've later understood is referred to as reptilians. They definitely have a reptile quality to them. They're very large. They're probably 6.5 feet tall, very muscular, very large, very big, menacing, have a very bad scent, a very bad odor to them, greenish gray, scaly skin. They also have appeared a number of times, and they have a very strong warrior quality about them. They also have directed the Greys in some of my encounters. Some of the behavior of the Greys have been interesting. And it's strange that for some reason there seems to be an ability to determine or to be able to differentiate between the sexes. Even though they look identical, you seem to be able to tell a female from a male. Early on, during the earlier years, the first 10, 12 years this was happening when I was keeping this to myself, there was still a tremendous amount of fear, and there was always what I would think would be a female assigned to me that would be assigned specifically to calm you. And it seemed that part of their calming technique, so this is the only sensitivity I noticed in the Greys, was these females that seemed to be assigned to keep you calm. There was some telepathic interaction to calm you, but they also had a way of holding your inner arm, your wrist and your inner arm. That has been repeated for me with both of my arms, but particularly my right arm, where in my early encounters for many years, there was somebody holding on to my wrist and right at the bend of my elbow on the inside during these things that had some type of physical effect or calming effect, I believe, on my neural system somehow, or on my nervous system rather.
Well, Nadine also says that the emotional part of this, of course, is to her the main topic. And the scientist, as she puts it, who has been conducting this special study that she has been a part of over the last 6 years, is actually what she described as an insectoid, praying mantis type, tall, very tall, and extremely intelligent, she says, and is also the only entity which has shown some type of concern or emotional, given her some emotional feedback. So she says that these insectoids are kind of looks like they are the big brains in this particular type of situations. But as she also points out, this is just a small part of this whole phenomenon. And whoever have been involved in these abductions over the years are probably just a small portion of everyone that is monitoring or visiting Earth. My time is running out, but I want to share the last thing I want to share with you before we go to lunch is a 12-minute interview. I hope you can bear with me. But it's with a lady that has been working with Werner von Braun. Before I say that, I just want to, before I run that interview, I just want to say a couple of things. In my opinion, this all points to a situation where there obviously has to be a much larger reality than we are aware of on this planet. Of course, what it is, how it is, it's impossible to say, but these things can't just be hallucinations or psychosis or whatever. And all the physical observations, all the scientific data we now have point in that direction that something has been going on for a very, very long time. And even though parts of governments might know about it, parts of military intelligences might know about it, there's also very many logical reasons why this has not been exposed to the public. I can think of several. I won't list them right here, but you probably know them all yourself. But we are living in this Garden of Eden, created by some cosmic consciousness. And we are probably, according to many of these people who have been in contact with this essential part of this consciousness, these other beings are also, of course, a part of this consciousness. This consciousness is exploring itself by producing itself in all different types of thinkable and unthinkable varieties all over the universe, probably. On this Earth, we have now a population of 7 billion individuals, and this is obviously a very popular place to stay at the time, because every single day on this planet, the population rises by approximately 220,000 people. We have estimated around 150,000 deaths every day and about 370,000 births, giving us a number of 220,000 new individuals arriving on this planet every day. If Copenhagen was destroyed by a bomb or whatever, and all of the million people living in this area disappeared, it would take exactly 4 days to recover the population on the planet. So that says something to what's actually going on here. If we see the development of population over the last 10,000 years, it tells us that the last century things have exploded on this planet due to our new ways of making it possible to live here, due to oil, due to transportation, due to technologies and all that. Over the last 100 of years, we see that it started rising in the mid-1800, and now it's just going on to the top. 200,000 new people, new individuals every day. And at the same time, these are not as many as they once were. We had the news last week saying that over the past 40 years, half of the population of animals on this planet have gone due to the rise of the human population. So we are in a situation where something has to be done. And to me, the awareness of this phenomenon, which is in the midst of this planetary place that we are, could be help us to bring an answer to our problems, and might be a new way of making it possible to live here. So we have different belief systems, extremely many belief systems giving us results like this all the time. an enormous dynamic emotional structure on the whole population on this planet. So I want to give you Carol Rosin for the last 10 minutes, if that's okay. She worked with, well, I have to jump here. She worked with Dr. Werner von Braun over the years. I have two versions of her interview. The short version is about 6 or 7 minutes. I'll give you that now because the time is running. But she was working with him the last period of his, before he died. And she was an educator by profession. And Dr. Werner von Braun was very concerned about weaponization of space. So before he died, he was extremely concerned to get out the message that we must not put weapons into space. And she was helping him in that campaign, worked closely with him. And at one instance, she was on a conference in somewhere in Arizona. She had an appointment with a psychiatrist or a therapist to meet him in a hotel room, in her hotel room. And while they were having this meeting, suddenly, she says, it seemed like the whole room suddenly started turning all around, and they got dizzy, both of them. And as this happened, something appeared through the walls of the room. And let's hear what she says.
And I sat up and I looked across the room, and there were a line of extraterrestrial beings coming through the wall. And one of them that was larger, maybe 4.5 feet or so, I'm guessing because I was sitting down, came through the wall and between the two of us and stood right in front of us and started having a conversation. And I've never read a UFO. Oh, I'm starting to break out in it. As I say it, I'm dripping because it brings it back, and I don't think about this in public. So this being was standing there with these beautiful, shiny eyes, kind of oval eyes. Now I've seen statues of them because I've been at this conference. And very plain head and little fingers, and it kind of floated into the room. And it said to me, you're going to remember everything that's taking place here and that we tell you. And then he said to me, you need to give out a message for us. If you want to do this, and you do, and you've been trained for this all your life, they said to me, your message is that none of us are hostile. It's very emotional for me to think about this. And it was the most loving, amazing experience I've ever had. And he said, she, I don't know, it seemed like a male to me. None of us are hostile. Everything is in control in the universes now. We're really sorry we hurt some people. We were doing experiments, but look what you do with other animals. We experiment for different reasons. In our case, they said it was to find out why humans are the way they are. We don't have as much of an emotional connection to where you have some humans who are sitting in the light, peacefully meditating, really at peace, and the other part of you are killing each other. You're killing each other. We don't do that, and we don't eat each other, and you do. And as they said each other, it was as though I was asking questions, but I wasn't, because it was such a shock to have this happening. I have a million questions now I wish I had asked, but they said, they called it humans and other animals. And for a long time, I would write, and my husband would correct me because he said, you can't say humans and other animals. My husband's also an editor. And I was always saying that line, and then this ET said to me, you kill each other, humans and other animals, and you eat them. So they don't eat them. They're vegetarians. And in fact, they're light beings. So they're eating something very light. I can't remember what the second, how they said it, but it was a something, and some of them they said don't eat. They don't need to eat. So I was getting kind of a lesson from them in how they exist. And they said that they live forever. Sometimes they keep renewing themselves. Different cultures have different ways of evolving and living in the universes, and that we can do the same. But first, we have to evolve to the point to prove to them that we're not going to keep shooting them down, was the way they put it to me. But later, as they continued this conversation, they defined that a bit more. That radar got in the way of them at first, and they had a whole explanation for what we had done to knock down the craft and how we had kept some of them prisoner. And they realized now that we thought too that they were keeping us, the human species, prisoner in the ships where they were doing these experiments. And I remember being in a bubble in a ship, but I've never talked about that in public, ever. And I will at some point. But what I remember from that was that there were a whole lot of people that were very scared there, and I wasn't. I was curious. I wanted to know what they were, go ahead, whatever you want to do, I was fine with it. And I was really fine with this experience. I thought this, and it is the most magnificent, nothing will ever top it as long as I live, loving experience and they wanted me to experience what the love of the human species has in it. I mean, it's breathtaking because we humans, some know it, and the spiritual masters and people that somehow get that we're loving beings and we're here on the earth and we can experience that. We can touch each other, and so it's a wonderful experience. And they said, this is what it's about. You have something unique here. You have a garden. You have a big garden planet. You had pure water and you're ruining it and you can't survive in this. And we have solutions for you. And we know a lot to teach you, and we want to know a lot about you still. We're not going to do those experiments anymore because they found out that it was the human ego, and they have egos too. And they explained to me that they have jobs. These first ones that came, they said, were scientists and astronauts like what we have, cosmonauts, and they have families, and they have extended families, and they know that they're all interconnected, and they can run their ships without anything, just mentally. And so they can do so much more, and it was getting so exciting to me. I mean, I was sobbing through the whole thing. I had big tears coming down my face because it was such an incredibly wonderful experience, and we can all be having it.
Okay. Thank you. There's a lot of more stuff that I would have told you if we had the time, but on the DVDs in the back there, much of this stuff is recorded, so you may have a look there. So thank you very much for your attention.